Good evening. Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call of tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise? I'm going to ask Rebecca Schreff, senior at Greenwich High School, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Irv Porter, member of District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm proud to be standing here with the co-chair of the Greenwich Boys and Girls State Commission, the Honorable Livy Florin. Livy and I are both products of the Boys and Girls State programs. I attended New York State Boys State in 1952. 1952, okay? And Livy was elected lieutenant governor of her Girls State program many, many years after I went. We both believe in the program, and that's why we're still giving back. So are others who attended. And I may miss somebody, and if I do at the end, I will ask you to stand. But we've got people here that are products of the Boys and Girls State program that are still doing what we're doing, and that is giving back. Please stand as I read your name. Steve Walco, Rich DePretta, Greg Fruman, Dean Goss. And is there anyone else that attended Boys and Girls State? If so, please rise and make sure. I'm sorry, Meskers, I missed you again. Please, please, please make sure that we've got your names. We're proud of all of you. Boys and Girls State is held on college campuses all across the country and has been ever since 1934. It's sponsored by the American Legion and the Legion Auxiliary. The program brings together citizen leaders that just finished their junior year of high school. During the week-long program, they form their own state government. And since each state is a little different, thus the notion of the structure being state-oriented. And in addition to the state programs, 2 outstanding delegates are chosen to attend Boys and Girls Nation, where 100 young people repeat the process and form their own federal government, including electing a president, members of the cabinet, vice president, etc. The Greenwich Boys State delegation for 2010 are, and they will stand forward and stand tall, Francis Ambrosio, John Kofer, Alexander Liebers, Lucas Sigmund, Dan Silkman, and Kyle Wozencroft. Some could not be here because they're very active, talented, gifted kids that have other commitments, and they've learned, as I hope we have all learned, that when you make a commitment, you fulfill it. Frank Ambrosio, out of this group, was elected to be the minority leader in the Senate, and he also received the Harry Bartlett Award for being the outstanding contributor to the Senate. Libby has some comments regarding the girls.
Thank you. Well, it's been my honor to serve on this Boys and Girls State Commission with Irv Porter. I started in 1997. He is the heart and soul and also the head of this program. To select our delegates each year, we accept nominations from housemasters and headmasters at Greenwich High School and from our local independent schools. The nominees are then interviewed by a panel consisting of elected officials and members of American Legion Post 29. The delegate selections are based upon scholastic record, citizenship, leadership, community contributions, and the interview. It is a very, very competitive process. Each year, our moderator, Tom Byrne, conducts a special forum for the delegation members. The topic is parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules. This teaches our representatives the language of legislation, and it gives them a major head start. Tom's instruction really makes a difference. The 2010 delegates to Laurel Girls State are Mary Bacon, Jordana Sepalowitz, couldn't be here, Mary Alice Jackson, Rebecca Schreff, Anna Sternberg, and Kendall Whitmer, who also could not be with us tonight. Rebecca, who led us in the Pledge of Allegiance, received many, many accolades at Girls State. She was elected Speaker of the House, and she was honored with the Yeoman F. Award, given by the counselors, and the Connell Award, given by the other delegates, the other juniors in high school at that time. And all of these awards were given for outstanding contributions to the program. So thank you for welcoming these wonderful young people tonight. It's fabulous that they get to see our legislature in action. Thank you.
If I could just say, first of all, I thought Mr. Porter had told me he went to Boys Colony, not, but I must have been mistaken. I think when he asked for those others who had gone, I think I saw Dan Ferniers, David Detchen, Ginny Krob. Is that right? Okay, so we'll include them in the list next year. And I want to say it is a wonderful accomplishment to send such a large delegation. Each year Greenwich does this, and it is only because of the efforts of Irv Porter, Livy Florin, and the support, financial and otherwise, of the American Legion and the Legion Auxiliary. So all involved deserve our gratitude. Thank you very much. All right. As all members have received a copy of the proposed minutes of our July 12th special meeting, the reading of those minutes will be omitted. Are there any suggested, I think we have to, we did the June minutes at July, right? So only July is outstanding. Are there any suggested changes to those proposed minutes for the July meeting? Hearing none and absent objection, those minutes stand adopted upon unanimous consent. All right. Irv Porter, again, from District 6, on behalf of District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My purpose is to offer a tribute to Clifford Frost. There are copies up here for those that wish a copy, or for members of the press, and each of the delegates from District 6 have received a copy. Whereas Clifford Frost, a member of the representative town meeting for 32 years, serving as chair of District 6 and as the chair of the Fire and Police Committee for many of those years, died peacefully on June 14, 2010 at the age of 83. Whereas Clifford Frost loved and served his hometown of Greenwich with distinction in a variety of ways. Cliff, or Frosty as we know him, was affectionately known throughout the town. He was a true Old Greenwich native, tracing his roots back to the 1700s through the Ford family. He graduated from Greenwich High School in 1945 and enthusiastically enlisted in the United States Air Force, the first of many things that he did to serve his country and his community. He served from 1945 to 47 as a B-29 flight engineer. After being honorably discharged, he attended the University of Bridgeport, and in 1950 opened the Old Greenwich Children's Shop, a successful children's clothing business which he continued to manage and operate until 1984. He served as the president of the Old Greenwich Business Association, the president of the Old Greenwich Lions Club. He was a licensed real estate broker from 1969 to 2001. From 1980 until 2000, he worked for the town of Greenwich on the Board of Tax Review. He also operated in association with his son-in-law, the Maloney Brothers Hockey Schools. Cliff was an active member of the representative town meeting, serving as chair for many years, also the Republican Town Committee, where he also served as chair. He was appointed a Justice of the Peace in 1960, and he served in that capacity for 30 years. He was an avid yachtsman and a member of the Old Greenwich Yacht Club and the Rocky Point Club, and once was the oldest person in the state of Connecticut to hold a personal jet ski license at the age of 75. He was a devoted sports fan, loved the New York Rangers and the New York Yankees, but his greatest passion and joy was cheering for his grandchildren's teams at the Greenwich Skating Club, Greenwich Youth Lacrosse, Brunswick School, Greenwich High School, Junior and Senior Babe programs, and St. Lawrence University. In 1949, he became a member of the Sound Beach Volunteer Fire Department and would go on to serve as its president and as an assistant fire chief. He remained active and devoted member of the department until his death. In 1979, he oversaw the reacquisition and complete restoration of one of Sound Beach's original fire engines, the 1931 Seagrave Pumper. This easy for me to say, this magnificent piece of Sound Beach history is his legacy and celebrates his 61 years of dedication to the department. He waved proudly from the truck this past Memorial Day as he took one last ride in the parade he loved, and in which in his younger days he marched with the Sound Beach Band as its bass drummer. And it is that association standing next to him and marching next to him as a snare drummer that made Cliff and I very close. The Sound Beach Volunteer Fire Department honored him by taking him on his final ride on his beloved antique fire truck from the firehouse to his memorial service and his final resting place at the First Congregational Church. Now therefore, it be resolved that the entire membership of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting joins District 6 in honoring Cliff Frost's life and extends our sympathies and our thanks for Cliff's service to our community, to his family, and particularly his daughters, Vicki and Ann, and his grandchildren. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Will the members please rise and join me in a moment of silence in memory of Cliff Frost? Thank you. That now brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. I notified our district and committee chairs last night that based upon the reports we had received regarding organization of this agenda, I would recommend that, number one, there be no consent calendar items. Number two, we would combine for voting purposes items 3, 5, 6, and 7. 3, 5, 6, and 7. And that would leave to handle separately items 1, 2, 4, 8, and 10. Item 9 having been withdrawn by Mr. Crowell, but Mr. Crowell indicated he did intend to offer a sense of the meeting resolution tonight. I will recognize him after the conclusion of the agenda items for the purpose of offering that motion. And as I had informed everyone, that being a non-agenda item, before we can consider it, there must first be a motion to take up that non-agenda item, which must carry by a 2/3 majority, and that is pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act. All right. In order to combine items for voting purposes, we must adopt a motion to suspend the rules to do so. Is there such a motion to suspend the rules to combine items 3, 5, 6, and 7 for voting purposes? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules to combine items 3, 5, 6, and 7 for voting purposes. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of suspending the rules to combine items 3, 5, 6, and 7, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Item 3, and let me say this, if there are any speakers who would like to preserve their right to speak on item 1, which is the child safety ordinance, or item 8, the proposed rule change with the Capital Review Committee, there are sign-up sheets outside the hall and up front, so I encourage you to do that. So let us take up the first of our combined items. That is item number 3. David Tice, our selectman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. Be it resolved that the following named person, nominated by the Board of Selectmen, be appointed member of the Greenwich High School Musical, Instructional Space, and Auditorium Building Committee for an indefinite term, Jackie Walsh.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 3 has been moved and seconded. Bob Brady, Chair of our Education Committee.
Good evening. The Education Committee met last Monday night, the 13th, to interview Jackie. All districts were represented. Jackie is an architect with experience in the design and construction of complex, multi-million-dollar buildings, including theaters. She's experienced in all aspects of the design, permitting, contracting, and project supervision. Her graduate work includes an MA from Harvard in architecture. She has taught construction at Columbia University and has much experience in qualifications, other experience in qualifications. She's been active in Greenwich civic activities, especially the PTA. 2 of her children have graduated from the high school, and 1 is a freshman there. She's married to Michael Carter, RTM District 6, and I hope we will not hold that against her. The committee voted 12-0-0 to recommend her appointment to the MESA Building Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have our Appointments Committee report on item 3? Anyone on the Appointments Committee care to give us a report? Dr. Carlson, District 1.
Mrs. Welsh appeared before us on Monday night. I believe everyone in the room thought that she was an excellent candidate to be on such a building committee, and her qualifications were very highly suitable. The vote was 10 in favor with 2 abstentions. District 1 and 2 abstained. And the abstentions had to do with the project rather than the individual, in that District 1 and 2 were of the view that the whole project should be slowed down and didn't want to do anything to push it forward. But this lady is, in my opinion, excellently suited for this if you want to do it.
Thank you. Discussion on item 3. Item 5 now comes before us. David Tice with that resolution.
Mr. Moderator, be it resolved that the town of Greenwich accept a conveyance of 374 square feet of land at the corner of Old Church Road and Fairfield Road in Greenwich, a gift from the Country Day School.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 5 has been moved and seconded. Peter Berg, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening, everybody. Item 5 is the conveyance of land at the corner of Old Church Road at Fairfield Road. This item was presented by Dustin Anderson, Executive Assistant to the first Selectman at the Land Use Committee last Monday night. Mr. Anderson explained that this land is being transferred to the town by Greenwich Country Day School to allow for the widening of Old Church Road in front of the new upper school building, to allow for a right turn lane. There is no cost to the town for the land. The land use had no controversy on this item. Our vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, we were going to take this matter up last Monday evening, but nobody appeared, and since we didn't have any more information other than what you all have in your explanatory comments, we chose not to take a vote.
Thank you. Vin DeMarco, Chair of the Transportation Committee.
Mr. Moderator, I have to confess, fellow members, that we did not take this item up. my own fault because I was working off the explanos. It wasn't listed in the cover sheets of either of the calls we got, and I simply missed it. But I will say that I did personally look at the item. Several members I know did look at it as well. There didn't seem to be any issue. No one let me know that, and I didn't think there was either. So no problem with it. Thanks.
Thank you. Discussion on item 5. Item 6 now comes before us. Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. Resolved to appropriate $288,550 from the Capital Non-Recurring Fund balance to account number Z345-592-00-11182 for the purchase and installation of an emergency generator for the Western Greenwich Civic Center.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 6 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of the committees that considered this, beginning with Mr. Kavee on behalf of our Public Works Committee.
Yes, we considered this on Monday night. I as vice chair, substituting for Rick Crowell. The request is reasonable, but and the vote was 10 in favor, 1 abstention. The abstention was myself in District 12. I did so because I feel that you're actually voting to spend $288,550,000, not what the explanos say, $99,000 cost to the town, because there are an awful lot of ifs in the explanos and in the resolution. Namely, the state doesn't promise to deliver any reimbursement beyond, I believe it was November 15th. 11 and a half weeks later, there's a guesstimate that this project will be complete, dependent on deliveries from outside vendors, 10 weeks and 10 days. That's December 9th. So the earliest guesstimate for this project to be complete is December 9th. Hopefully the state will manage to continue its grant beyond the November 15th date. If they don't reach completion by December 9th, you're then dependent on the Department of Homeland Security not reimbursing by December 31st. There's a good chance of that happening. Therefore, when we approve this item, we can expect to very probably or very possibly expend $288,000 out of Town of Greenwich Capital with no reimbursement. So the vote was 10 in favor, 1 abstention, District 12, and District 1 was absent.
Thank you. Gordon Ennis, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Finance Committee met last Monday in the ground floor lounge of Town Hall. Mr. Kavee was absolutely accurate in pointing out the vulnerability we have here. It is possible that we won't be reimbursed either through the state program, which currently holds the funds, and or Homeland Security if there is no remedy that is brought about between an agreement, in an agreement between the state and Homeland Security. That is the reason why we have to vote on the $288,500 or $550,000. The things to remember about this item are that there are 2 Red Cross designated emergency shelters in town. The Western Civic Center is one of them. This generator, which will have an independent fuel supply for over 72 hours, or approximately 72 hours, allows the emergency facility to operate at full capacity, completely off the grid. It's completely self-sustained. So in the judgment of the town fathers and in the judgment of the Finance Committee, it's essential that we fund it. If we are reimbursed, those monies will be returned to the general fund. The Finance Committee recognized this and voted unanimously 12-0-0 to approve the funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 6. Item 7 now comes before us. John Crary, Town Administrator.
Good evening. Resolved that the sum of $199,720 be, and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to the following program year 2010 Community Development Block Grant funded activities. $25,000 to the Greenwich Red Cross Motor Services, $12,000 to TAG Transportation Services, $74,330 to the YMCA St. Roch Daycare Rehab Phase 1, $20,640 to neighbor facility improvements, $40,000 to Pathways, Inc., emergency generator at 509 East Putman Avenue, and $18,750 to St. Luke's LifeWorks Rose Park Roof Replacement Project.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports on this item, beginning with Karen Fossiliotis, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Good evening. Princess Urfe, Director of the Community Development Block Grant Program, appeared before our committee to explain the resolution, which is number 7 on our call. The $199,700 that was received by the CDBG is reimbursement from Diamond Hill, who had received a grant from CDBG in 2002 to rehabilitate 6 affordable housing units. A condition of the contract with CDBG was that Diamond Hill was to use the property as affordable housing for 10 years. The Diamond Hill property was sold in 2009, which breached the terms of the contract in that the site was only used for affordable housing for 7 years, not the 10 years required by the contract. As a result, they had to repay a portion of the grant. HUD conditioned the reimbursement to CDBG in requiring that these money be used in 2010 for shovel-ready projects. Normally, CDBG would reallocate the money for the next year, in this case, 2011. The CDBG committee looked at the 2011 projects for which they had applications and determined that the 6 projects that are on the call were shovel-ready, and these projects were worthy of funding. Ms. Urfe also added 3 public service projects that will receive $3,000 each. One committee member asked why the Family Center's reflooring project that was rejected by the RTM at the June meeting was not on the list, and Ms. Urfe explained that the project was not considered because it did not appear on their 2011 budget request. She was also questioned about the $20,000 cost to refurbish the neighbor-to-neighbor space. It was noted that the space is very small, and it was questioned as to whether $20,000 was really needed to refurbish it. And she explained that the space, and she agreed that it is small, will be reconfigured to make it more efficient and streamlined. Also, it was noted that when it rains, water infiltrates the space, and right now food is stored outside the room and by emergency exits. She noted that the committee members scrutinized the budget request and felt that this was a worthy project for funding and the amount was a fair amount. Another question arose as to the size of the generator for the Pathways building and whether the price of the generator was a little inflated. Ms. Urfe stated that the group is proposing to buy a commercial-sized generator that will power the entire building, so it would not be like a homeowner buying it just to run the refrigerator and other essentials. The committee voted to approve the request and recommend the allocation of the monies to the full body of the RTM by a vote of 12-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. Ennis with the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, the Finance Committee met last Monday on this item. Princess Urfe presented. She was thoroughly prepared, did an outstanding job, and responded well to every question. The prior speaker has this pretty much nailed. We are happy to see that a lot of projects, since this was money they hadn't anticipated, a lot of projects were able to move forward where they wouldn't have been funded until next year. Now they're able to start sooner. So as a result of that and the other happy news, the committee voted 12-0-0 and supports this item unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 7. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Combined items 3, 5, 6, and 7, and proceed to poll your delegation. We will continue with the remaining separate items. The first one coming before us is item number 1, and let me just remind again any interested speakers who would like to sign up. I don't see any names up here. If there's anyone on the list out there, could I ask someone, is that Mr. Porter back there? Mr. Porter, could you just check and see if there are any names on the sign-up list out there? Thank you. All right, Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, the Legislative and Rules Committee is submitting a substitute resolution resolved that the RTM consider enacting the Child Safety Zone Ordinance.
This is a substitute resolution.
Yes, sir.
In what regard is it different than our call?
It's different in many respects, which I can talk about. There's language differences. I emailed it to all the district heads.
Let me ask this. Is there any one of our members who is unaware of what is in the substitute resolution? All right. I see many hands, so we're going to have to enumerate if we can, or offer the item that was on the call, and then we'll make amendments to it.
I have extra red line versions. I had emailed these around on Wednesday to all the district chairmen and the committee chairmen. Maybe they didn't get around, but I have about 25 red line versions. I can do it either way, whichever way you'd like.
So the possibilities are you would just tell us now how the substitute is different, or I would recognize you to make the amendments.
I can go through and say how it's different.
Okay,
as
why
I
don't
go
we do
through
that?
my report. I can give the report now and do it that way.
Okay.
All right. As I say, we're offering a substitute resolution. The Legislative and Rules Committee took up this child safety ordinance in May, which had been referred to our committee several months previously. Several significant changes have been made to the ordinance since it was last before the RTM. The most important changes are sex offenders who are on registries in other states other than Connecticut are now subject to this ordinance. The definition of a sex offender is more carefully defined to include only those persons who are likely to offend against minors. The child safety zones have been more carefully defined to include only those areas where children are most likely to be found. The entirety of the parks will no longer be included in child safety zones. Limited access under certain circumstances is provided to a sex offender to be in a child safety zone, and the town agencies will be required to give the Board of Selectmen the areas where they propose to have a child safety zone, and after a public hearing, the Board of Selectmen shall submit approved maps to the RTM for final approval or rejection. We took 2 votes in May on the child safety zone ordinance as had been revised by the Law Department with the help of a Legislative and Rules Subcommittee. While many on our committee believe that the ordinance as redrafted is more palatable, the majority of the committee felt that this ordinance offers no real deterrent value in that it only provides for a fine of $100. We also had general concerns about whether this ordinance will provide any meaningful protection for our children. No one from the police department offered any promises that there would be more extensive police presence in any of the safety zones, and admitted that it is likely they would appear at a safety zone only upon a call of a concerned citizen about someone who is in the area. Police acknowledge they have the right to approach an individual to determine his or her identity and to ask that person the reason for why they are remaining in the area. This ordinance, the committee believes, also subjects the town to a possibility of an ACLU lawsuit and does not provide the police department with any meaningful new tools to protect our children. Others were concerned about the blight of signage around our schools, playgrounds, and other areas that may be designated as a child safety zone. Our vote as to legal order in May was 3 in favor, 9 opposed. Our vote on the merits at that time in May was 1 in favor, 11 opposed. This ordinance was scheduled to be heard at our June meeting, but because I missed the filing deadline, the matter couldn't be considered at that time. There was consideration given to placing this on the call of the July special meeting, but some proponents of the ordinance voiced concern that the possibility of a light turnout wouldn't give this ordinance a fair hearing for all RTM members to consider. It was therefore decided to bring it back in September. We again took up this item at our regularly scheduled meeting on September 13. We heard from the following people: Abby Wadler and Wayne Fox from the Law Department, Stephanie Palmino, who's a Greenwich resident who has a relative who is a registered sex offender, Brian Timms, president of the Fairfield County chapter of the ACLU, and Sergeant Garrett Porticelli of the Greenwich PD, as well as former RTM member Sam Romeo. We first considered proposed changes to the ordinance that were prepared by Attorney Wadler, which revisions were circulated to our committee a couple of weeks ago. And after hearing from Attorney Wadler and after committee discussion, we moved to incorporate changes in paragraphs 1, 2, C5, D3, A, and C4. Our vote to incorporate the Law Department changes was 8-4. We then took up a separate motion to delete paragraph C9, which appears in your call, and that was deleted. Our vote was 8 in favor, 3 opposed with 1 abstention. We then unanimously chose to make grammatical corrections suggested by Mary Ferry. Paragraph 5 on page 3 of the call, after the word spectators in the 4th line, we inserted the word and. And at page 5, paragraph 6, the next to the last line, delete the word the and insert in its place and, so it reads an officer. This substitute resolution and a red line version, as I say, were transmitted by email to committee and district chairpersons by me on Wednesday. If anybody wants extra substitute resolutions which show the red line versions, I could pass those out after I finish speaking. We then heard from the people who were visiting that evening. Stephanie Palmino, a Greenwich resident, as I mentioned before, she's an opponent of the ordinance based on her opinion that this ordinance doesn't offer any degree of meaningful safety for our children because the vast majority of sex offenders whose victims are children are parents or other adults who are in a position of authority and who regularly see the children and know them: teachers, coaches, members of the clergy, camp counselors, and the like. This ordinance would not provide protection for any of those children. Attorney Brian Timms, president of the Fairfield County chapter of the ACLU, addressed our committee. He referred to the June 4 letter written by Executive Director of the Connecticut ACLU, Andrew Schneider, which letter is in your explanatory comments. Attorney Timms was asked by one committee member if the ordinance passed, would the town be sued by the ACLU? Mr. Timms did not offer a direct answer, but did say that the ACLU would keep all of its options open. Sergeant Porticelli was recognized, and he stated that that this ordinance does not give the police unbridled authority to approach citizens in a child safety zone, and acknowledged that this ordinance would not provide the town with any different powers than what it already has to approach persons acting in a suspicious manner in and around a proposed child safety zone. It does provide an officer with the authority to ask a registered sex offender to leave a zone. Sam Romeo also addressed our committee and cited a recent California Supreme Court case which confirms that correctional authorities have the right to hold sex offenders indefinitely even after their prison term is completed. After listening to the speakers, our committee took votes on the substitute resolution. As to legal order, our vote was 2 in favor, 10 opposed. The votes in favor of legal order were from districts 8 and 10. Our job at the Legislative and Rules Committee, we believe, is to let people know of the risk of litigation when it comes to proposed legislation, while the vote of 2 and 10, the negative vote as to legal order, doesn't necessarily mean that all the people believe that this resolution is unconstitutional, while some do, but the others also felt that we are putting the town at risk of litigation for an ordinance that really doesn't offer our children any meaningful protections. We also took a vote as to the merits of the ordinance. Our vote on the merits was 1 in favor, 11 opposed. The 1 vote in favor of the ordinance was from District 10.
All right. Now, let me ask, is everyone satisfied that they know what they are voting on? No. Okay, so we're going to have to go through each individual change I'm talking about in the substitute resolution. My understanding is you're offering a substitute resolution,
Yeah.
correct?
The alternative, Mr. Moderator,
Oh,
is, as I
hang
say,
on, I'm willing to do what the body, but we are asking the body to vote on something. It has been sent a proposed ordinance in the call. You're now saying you are offering something different than what was in the call.
Yes, sir.
And my question simply is everyone comfortable when I call for a vote that you know what you're voting on? So the answer is no. So we need to inform the body how the substitute resolution differs from the proposal in the call.
Okay. And as I say, I can do it one of two ways. My guess is there's going to be there's more speakers. I have about 20 copies. I think these could be circulated. These are the red line versions. They show every change that it was made from the item in the call.
All right. I mean, how many are there? Can you just refer them? Read them through?
Okay.
Because we don't have, I have not yet accepted anything to then continue with this. So we need to know what is before us, that's all.
Okay. I can go through them then. In paragraph 1, the purpose section, after the words Connecticut Commissioner of Public Safety is inserted the following language, which maintains a registry, in parentheses, the registry, in quotes, as defined below, of such individuals. In paragraph 2A, Child Safety Zone, the second line, where it says excluding, however, any any public library, it now reads any non-school public library. The word non-school was inserted. At the bottom of that paragraph 2A, next to the last line, inserted after the word adjacent to, is the language, the area delineated as a child safety zone.
All right, I'm not, oh, okay. So the fourth line from the bottom, is that, okay. That is located adjacent to what?
After the word adjacent to, insert the language, the area delineated as a child safety zone. And delete the rest? No, the rest of it's deleted is the language, the land on which a public playground, recreation, and/or teen center, sports facility, or field, school, or educational facility is located.
Okay.
All right. In C2, the language, everywhere the word, the phrase custodial parent, the word custodial is deleted, so it's parent. So in 2, it says any sex offender who is a delete parent, so it'll just read delete custodial, so it'll read who is a parent. Same in paragraph 3, you delete the word custodial. Same in paragraph 4, first line, delete the word custodial, and in 5 as well. And then in the fourth line down, where it says who are participants or spectators, that's where the word and is inserted. The next change is all of paragraph 9 is deleted, which is the language, any activity by a sex offender in a child safety zone authorized by a permit issued by the Greenwich Police Chief and ending with Board of Selectmen and the representative town meeting. That is all deleted. In paragraph 4, at the end, is inserted, these maps shall thereafter be posted on the town's website. Paragraph 6, second paragraph, right after it says, in the same or any other child safety zone, the word the is deleted and an is put in its place. And I believe that's it.
Perfect. Is there any question as to what the substitute resolution now provides?
I can hand these out to anybody that wants them.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. That substitute resolution being offered on behalf of our Legislative and Rules Committee, it does not require a second and is now before us. I will call for the committee reports on this, beginning with our Education Committee and its chair, Bob Brady.
Good evening once again. The education.
Incidentally, I'm sorry, let me, before I get into that, let me just explain. You did hear in Mr. Wells' report that Legislative and Rules voted 210, I believe, that this item was not in legal order. And yet I accepted this to put before the body. And the reason for that is I rely on the opinion of our town attorney, who has given me his opinion that this is in legal order. And so we all have a role to play, and I must rely on the town attorney's opinion. And for that reason, I have accepted this. Mr. Brady.
Good evening. We met last Monday night on the 13th. All districts were represented. Our vote on this, to get to that first, was 3 in favor, 5 opposed, with 4 abstentions. Districts 1, 4, and 11 were the 3 districts in favor. We were assisted by Wayne Fox and Abby Wadler of the Law Department, Sergeant Corticelli of the Police Department, and Sam Romeo. The ordinance was originally prepared by the Community Policing Group, referred to Legislative and Rules last year, and is now back before us. The ordinance provides for the establishment of child safety zones, areas from which sex offenders, as defined, are prohibited. Sex offenders refusing to leave a child safety zone would be violating the ordinance and subject to a $100 fine. Attorney Fox reported to us that Legislative and Rules voted 210-0 that the ordinance is in legal order, thus, in fact, not in legal order, raising the question whether the RTM should even take the item up. The ordinance Legislative and Rules voted upon is an amended version of the one in the call and the one which we considered. Sergeant Corticelli explained that the ordinance would give the police the authority to require a sex offender to leave a child safety zone or be cited and fined. Presently, they may only request the sex offender to move on. He compared the ordinance to those requiring a permit to use an athletic field or prohibitions on using a grill in Bruce Park. However, when asked, neither Mr. Fox nor Ms. Wadler could identify any other town ordinance in which the violation was not an objective action, but simply being there. Mr. Fox was questioned on the cost of defending the ordinance if it was challenged. He said that would depend upon many factors, but could be several hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it is defensible. He was also questioned on the establishment of the child safety zones. Pursuant to Article 4, they must be established within 6 months of the passage of the ordinance. There is no provision for changes, ever. The RTM gets to approve or reject, but it's not clear that it gets to alter the proposed child safety zones, which appears to be in conflict with its responsibilities, for example, with the Plan of Conservation and Development. Our vote was 3-5-4. The noes are concerned that while well-intentioned, the ordinance was likely to be ineffective and may cost us substantially to defend, that it poses right of peaceable assembly problems greater than those in the Greenwich Point Leiden suit, and that Legislative and Rules found it not in legal order. The abstentions are concerned that it opens up these problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Sadek-Khan, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening. The Parks and Recreation Committee took up this item last Tuesday night. Present to discuss it with us were Mr. Fox and Ms. Wadler from the Law Department and Officer Corticelli from the Police Department. Doug Wells also joined us for another discussion. He ended up helping us with this one. We were working from the substitute resolution which was given to us by Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox began by explaining that the Law Department is not an advocating body for public policy. It only sees that the policy is in order. He shared some of the concerns that he had heard, that this ordinance might be unconstitutional, unfair, and cause lawsuits against the town. He clarified that the ordinance contains areas that could be challenged, but that they were defensible and constitutional. Some of the questions were asked by the committee members were, does the town have insurance to cover the cost of defending the ordinance if it's challenged? Mr. Fox answered that the defense would be handled in-house. Insurance coverage depends on the claim. Our deductible is $1 million. Not sure if the town would really need outside counsel in such a case. Does the state have a bill was another question. We were told that the bill did not pass as time ran out, so the state has not adopted such legislation. How many other towns have adopted ordinances and legislation? 4 to 5 other towns have adopted some form of legislation, and so far they've had no challenges. Officer Corticelli pointed out that the goal of this ordinance is to protect children and prevent crime. He pointed out again that the number of registered offenders in a 10-mile radius of our area has risen from 190 to 220. Greenwich's number has gone from 4 to 6 registered offenders. Stamford has 69. He further explained that this ordinance helps keep sex offenders out of designated areas versus their having to be stopped when they enter them. While Greenwich has not had a major problem in the last few years, the Citizens Initiative has brought this to the RTM. It has not been brought by the police department. Concerns were expressed. A $100 fine is not a deterrent. Only a court period of probation is effective. The town is exposing itself to lawsuits with this ordinance. Signage regarding the ordinance would be offensive in itself. And one member commented that the best protection of children is their own parents. Having received and reviewed the substitute resolution offered by Legislative and Rules, which you have already been aware of, we voted on the substitute resolution as follows. 191. District 3 voted yes. District 1 was absent. The abstaining vote was from District 2, who had not made a decision but was concerned about the signage and the very disturbing nature of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Foss-Leotis, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
By a vote of 9-1, the Health and Human Services Committee considered the proposed ordinance that was presented in the call, even though we weren't asked to. The committee did not consider the substitute ordinance proposed by Legislative and Rules, but reviewed the one that was in the call. The committee agreed that this matter is an emotional topic, but in the end, they did not believe that this provided our school children with an extra level of safety and put an added burden on the Greenwich Police Department to ensure that an individual's rights were protected and that they were not unfairly targeted as a sex offender when they may not be one. The consensus was that the ordinance is flawed and that Connecticut does not have categories of sex offenders like, for example, New York, which categorizes a sex offender as one who is at low risk of reoffending and those who are high-risk offenders. The consensus also was that the ordinance itself was vague. A number of members gave examples of the law failing to differentiate individuals convicted of being a sex offender for receiving or distributing child pornography after sexting, and that's where a 18-year-old boy or girl receives or sends a text with a questionable picture of their girlfriend or boyfriend to them or their friends. There was a case like this in, we believe, in Kentucky. Because current Connecticut law does not differentiate these types of convictions, the ordinance would require banning these individuals from school campuses unless they have a child in their school. And committee members questioned as to whether these individuals were truly a risk to the town's children. Another example was that chronically medically ill people, such as schizophrenics, sometimes, and this individual is a psychiatrist, sometimes urinate near a school, for example, and are charged and convicted as sexual offenders because of indecent exposure near school children, and they would fall under the ordinance. They could easily be removed from the campus for indecent exposure, which does not require this ordinance. It was also noted that if an individual or school personnel saw a person they felt did not belong on school grounds, they could always call the Greenwich Police Department to investigate the individual. The question again was raised as to whether this ordinance was constitutional. It should be noted that 2 committee members received a package from an anonymous source, but since it was from an anonymous source, we did not consider it because it was from an anonymous source. The committee stressed that no one denies that sex crimes, whether against an adult or a child, are heinous and is a life-altering event for the victim. However, the committee questions as to whether this ordinance would strengthen our community, and ultimately committee members concluded that this ordinance, as proposed, would not. We did vote to postpone this matter indefinitely, but since it is the ordinance that's in the call, I don't know if it's appropriate to offer it at this time. It's not the substitute resolution, it's the original resolution.
Well, I would, my judgment is they are substantially the same thing,
Okay.
so it would be in order.
Okay, the committee voted to postpone this matter indefinitely, or offer to postpone this matter indefinitely by a vote of 11-1-0. The lone dissent felt it would be better to vote on the matter once and for all and dispose of it accordingly. So,
All right. That being our final committee report, I will recognize you for purpose of offering that motion. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Mr. Wells, yes. Why don't you...
The most valuable player on my Legislative and Rules Committee, Mr. Bergwager, pointed out that I missed one change. In paragraph 5, I pointed out the fact that we had deleted custodial in front of parent, but in that same line, right after the word guardian, we inserted as defined by Connecticut General Statutes, section 17A 1, and then in parentheses 12. That was an insertion so that it refers to how a guardian is defined by that section of the law.
All right, could you just repeat that? This is on page 3 of the call, section 2.
It's
C5.
2C5.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Right after the word guardian is inserted the following language, as defined by Connecticut General Statutes, section 17A-1, and then in parentheses 12.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so that is part of the substitute resolution that we are now considering. Ms. Vasiliotis.
On behalf of the Health and Human Services Committee, I move that we postpone this item indefinitely.
That being offered on behalf of our committee, it does not require a second. The motion to postpone indefinitely is debatable, and debate may go into the merits of the main item. The effect of voting on this essentially is to switch yeses to nos and nos to yeses. The adoption of a motion to postpone indefinitely has the effect of killing the item, and it would be disposed of, and it would have to come back through the ordinary course if it were to come back to us. All right, discussion on the Health and Human Services Committee motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely. Mr. Von Keisling, the trains have arrived.
In the some 60 years that I lived in this town, some odd years, I've never been a commuter. I had to pick the right day. My apologies, and I thank Dr. Carlson for sitting in for us. On this question of child protection ordinance, this has been going on, as we all know, painfully for a long time. When it first came before us, I objected to this ordinance as being too wide-ranging and not focused enough to be an effective piece of legislation, which up to the standards that I hope this body would have. Since that time, and I must give particular credit to Mr. Bergweger from our district, he did yeoman service in cleaning this ordinance up, focusing it, taking care of a lot of the objections that are brought before it. We have had a history, unfortunately, of legislative wrangling, if that's the best way of putting it, rather than substance discussion. I find this is one of the cases where we've gone round and round and round on a topic dealing with peripheral issues rather than the main point in direct debate. I find this frustrating. I know that it's been frustrating to our administration and our staff. We have a law department which, if they were at the normal billing, in fact our town attorney is, would be quite expensive. I have no idea how much time has been spent by staff on this. I have some idea how much time has been spent on the litter ordinance on this matter, and it's a massive amount of internal legal bill, if you like, on this for these discussions to go back and forth. It's one thing to be legitimate and ask for the legal help to bring it into order and bring it before us in a workmanlike fashion. It's another thing to just keep churning, as was happening in my divorce, where they churned the legal bill and churned it until they settled the settlement.
Yes, Mr. Von Keisling, you are speaking on a motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely.
Well, both were equally painful. The point being...
For whom?
Obviously, Mr. Moderator, not the lawyers. But seriously, we are in a time of economic strain in our town where we are asking for a leanness in our operations, where we're cutting staff down and making them do more work. To spend exorbitant amounts of time like this, I think, is very unfortunate. I think after all this has been vetted and put through it, it deserves to be brought to us up or down. There are people that feel both ways on this. I would vote in favor of this ordinance as presented, but that's my opinion if it came to a vote. But I think to just drag this on and on and on follows a great tradition of tree ordinance and alarms appeal, and I can't think of a number of different issues that have languished and languored and gone in a circular motion to great waste. Let's put it up or down and vote on it. Thank you.
Guys, excuse me. When a speaker is speaking, Please give the speaker the respect that the speaker deserves. All right. Further discussion on the motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely. Is Stephanie Palmino here? Do you care to speak on this? Stephanie Palmino.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. It's not a pleasure to be here today, but I feel it's a duty to be here today. Would I rather be anywhere else on the world? You bet. But I think I sat at the Legislative and Rules Committee meeting, and I listened to the discussion, and I've listened to the discussion here, and I listened to the discussion 2 years ago. And I think where I hear flaws in this is that the ordinance itself offers no protection to children, and I think that's the basic reason that this should either be voted down or left indefinitely to perish on the vine. I think that some of the facts that I would like to bring out here is in putting this sex offender ban on the table. I've never, in all the years it's been mulling around, ever heard that the town brought not one single expert to the table to bear witness to this event. There was a radio show that was done in another town that included Andrew Schneider, the executive director of the ACLU in Connecticut, Dr. Randall Wallace, the director of special services for the treatment of problem sexual behavior, the director of Connecticut Sexual and Crisis Center, Sexual Assault and Crisis Center, and Anna Duragozi. All of them presented that this offers no protection to children. And I think if you think of it in a rational context, you can see that. If you look at the statistics, 95% of sexual assault victims, including children, know their assaulter. A child's far more likely to be assaulted and abused by a relative, a family friend, a coach, a clergyman, a babysitter, people in authority over them. Our own newscasts have pointed this out quite clearly. Every single case that has been in the newspaper recently, it was not brought out in the news media, but every single one of them was known to the person who assaulted them. Treatment professionals and criminologists, according to the National Center on Institutions and Alternatives in the 2007 report, noted that only very few sex offenders, once caught, recommit another sex crime. I think that's extremely relevant to this particular ordinance because this ordinance is looking at people who have committed a crime. Many actual child sex offenders never come to trial, or they plea bargain down to a lesser crime and never hit Megan's list at all. And if you think of it again, if 95% of people who assault children are in their own family, and 95% of those are the child's own parents and grandparents, you'd have to not only have a criminally intent mind, you'd have to be out of your mind to take what you could do in the privacy of your home and take it into the public park. So I think if you look at this ordinance as it's written, if you are in the park and a police officer comes and says to you, you have to leave, you can pay your fine and stay and then probably be arrested for combativeness, as the detective had noted to us, or you can step a foot out of the doorway and be on the sidewalk outside the park. Are the children any less safe in the park if you're standing in the park or a foot out of the park? Where is the protection in this? In Greenwich, I thought that there were 4 sex offenders. I'd forgotten that we had 2 more that recently came to light, again, every one of which knew the children. The largest study conducted on 9,691 released sex offenders 3 years after their release showed that 98 out of 100 of the non-child sex offenders did not reoffend, and that sex offenders are less likely than non-sex offenders to be arrested or rearrested for any crime. I personally would far rather know who in my neighborhood was a drunk driver, because that's a far greater risk to your children. Are we going to have no drunk driving zones around our town? That's a much higher risk to our children than this. I think also another factor is that sexual assaults, including against children, are very underreported. They're believed to be less than 10% of the actual occurrences, and again, that's because family members don't report generally on other family members, who again are 95% of the people committing crimes against children of a sexual nature. Researchers from the Children's Trust Fund, and the reason I'm throwing all this data out is it was brought up at one point that perhaps the statistics being used are sort of confabulated or not factual. Researchers for the Children's Trust Fund, using data from the Connecticut Department of Children and Families, state police abuser rehabilitation programs, and other sources, identified that more than half of child sex abusers were the child's biological parent. That's a pretty shocking statistic. So what that says to me as a researcher and as a person who is educated in research methodology is that we're looking at the wrong place to stop the crime of child sex abuse. We need to be teaching children how they can bring their problems to light when the problem is coming from someone in their own family or someone who's their teacher or their clergyman or a police officer, as we recently had come to light from another town, which I believe occurred here in this town. I think that the resources that we're looking on putting into this particular program would be far better spent if you had read the article in the Greenwich Times on the Department of Children's Welfare or whatever we call it in this town, in the state, if we put the money into protecting the children who are already in our care, who are much more likely to be the victims of abuse, I would strongly urge that we not penalize people further who have served their time when they're not likely to be the people who are committing the crimes against children. I think that nobody would condone any sexual assault or any other crime against children. I don't think you'll find a person who has been a stronger supporter of the Greenwich Police Department or any other police department than I have. But this is a flawed law, a flawed ordinance. It offers absolutely no protection to children, and I would urge you to turn it down.
Further discussion on the Health and Human Services Committee motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely. Angela Highland, District 7. And I remind any interested parties that an affirmative vote on this motion will have the effect of disposing of this item.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Hi, Angela Highland, District 7. I would stand to take up the vote this evening on this ordinance and also to vote positively on it. I think a couple of important things have been brought up. First of all, this has been upheld elsewhere. Greenwich is not out there alone. Both in Connecticut and elsewhere in the country, these kinds of ordinances have been upheld. And I think any additional toolbox we have, tool in the toolbox to protect children, I think is very valuable. There seems to be some concern that we may inconvenience someone who's only a level 1 sex offender as opposed to somebody more serious sex offender. I think the way I feel about it, a sex offender, it's like they used to say about pornography. You know it when you see it, right? We're not worrying about some deranged person doing something, untoward in a school district or something, but we're thinking about people who are more serious offenders. So I suggest we take it up tonight and you vote affirmatively. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Health and Human Services Committee motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely and proceed to poll your delegation. And I ask that you do it expeditiously, as we will need to await the result of that vote before determining if this is still before us. All right, yes, please, before we pass the cards around. If you are in favor of killing this item with this motion, you should vote yes. If you want to take a vote on the merits or to consider this further tonight, you should vote no. So an affirmative vote will kill this item, and we will proceed with our next agenda item. I do have the results of the vote on our combined items. Those were items 3, 5, 6, and 7. Those in favor, 179. Opposed, 1. Abstaining, 1. The combined items have carried. All right, now would be a time if you want to get up and stretch. We will await the result of this pending vote before proceeding further.
What?
I have the result of the vote on the Health and Human Services motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely. Those in favor, 113, opposed 82, abstaining 4. The motion merely requires a majority vote, so that motion to postpone indefinitely has carried. All right, that disposes of item 1. Item 2 now comes before us. May we have the resolution on that item, please? Amy Siebert, Commissioner of Public Works.
Good evening. I have here a substitute resolution. This is a resolution for the Riversville Road Bridge. These are fairly standard resolutions we bring before the RTM that are required by the Connecticut DOT. And in the resolution in the call, the very last whereas is supposed to be replaced by now therefore be it resolved. So again, it's the same content resolving that the town does support the Riversville Road Bridge project, and we are going to be replacing that bridge.
All right, so the substitute resolution merely takes out the last whereas, the word whereas, in the second to last line, and replaces it with now therefore be it resolved. Will a member please move the adoption of the substitute resolution? Substitute resolution on item 2 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports on this item, beginning with our Public Works Committee and its Vice Chair, Mr. Kavee.
The Public Works Committee considered this item, and the substitute alternate for District 8 pointed out the need for the change that was just proposed by the Commissioner. The committee rejected that change and voted, didn't reject it, it voted for the item as it appeared in the call. The form that it's in may not be consistent with Robert's Rules of Order, but it is a very declarative statement. It's not a whereas question mark. And we did not invoke that change. We left it as it stood. By virtue of this resolution, the town of Greenwich hereby supports the proposed project is a declarative statement, just as now therefore is a declarative statement. The commas separate that. And at any rate, the vote, as it appeared on the call, was 10 in favor, 1 opposed, which was the District 8 substitute alternate, because of the issue of whereas versus therefore. And it was 10 in favor, 1 opposed, with District 1 absent.
Thank you. All right, next, Gordon Ennis, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, the Finance Committee met on this last Monday. The item was presented by Amy Siebert. This is a standard resolution necessary to show that the town fully supports the bridge replacement project so that it will qualify under the STP program, which will provide us with a 90% reimbursement, 80 from the feds and 10 from the state. The total cost of the bridge is estimated to be $3.3 million. Reimbursement will be $2.97 million. Therefore, our net cost after reimbursement will be $330,000. Capital, this will be in the capital project for next year. 2012-13. And the replacement of this bridge is essential because, number one, the superstructure is rated critical, and there has been a weight limit imposed on all traffic, and other elements of the bridge are rated poor. So the committee voted 12-0-0 unanimously to support this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Vin DeMarco, Chair of our Transportation Committee.
Fellow members, the Transportation Committee did take this item up. The committee agreed to take it up after the chairman requested it. I was uncomfortable with the language in the resolution and the lack of supporting documentation. The fifth whereas clause indicates that the RTM has considered the concerns of residents who attended a public informational meeting, and the conclusion states that we fully support the proposed project based on the preliminary design performed by a consultant. Neither the concerns nor the consultant's report were provided. That information was gladly provided by the presenter prior to the standing committee meetings after a short phone call. The problem with the language, the substance, not the structure, was with the ambiguity of the qualifying phrase in the fifth whereas clause. The chairman would have offered, or I would have offered, an amendment tonight simply replacing the last two words of that clause, motoring public, to all users, with all users. It was learned that this resolution was provided by the state and therefore must be approved or not as written. It was also learned that despite the language, the Department of Public Works would be agreeable with the proposed substitute language and is in fact making the effort to see that this bridge is safe and convenient for all users. I was satisfied with this knowledge, so was everyone else. So I did not ask the committee to support an amendment. The committee voted 12-0 to approve.
Thank you. Discussion on item 2. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 2, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 4 now comes before us. Amy Siebert, Commissioner of Public Works.
Good evening. I guess we're saying here, we'll give you the short version so we don't have to read the entire package. Resolve that Chapter 9 of the Town Code, refuse, be amended as follows to waste and litter, the content being that which is included in the call under item 4.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 4 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports on this item? We will begin with Legislative and Rules, and Doug Wells, the chair.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, we took this item up the first time a year ago in September of 2009. When this resolution first came before us a year ago, the intention was to primarily was to clarify and quantify, to clarify the quantity and the definition of dangerous waste that would entitle the town to fine haulers bringing their waste into the transfer station. There had not been a change in the schedule, according to Mr. McLaughlin from the Law Department. There had not been a change in the schedule of fines since the late 40s. So the fines needed to be raised so as to provide an effective deterrent against homeowners and more specifically against commercial haulers to prevent them from saddling the town with the cost of disposing of dangerous waste. The ordinance proposed last September provided for a different schedule of fines for homeowners than those for commercial haulers. When this matter came to the RTM at the September 2009 meeting, it was referred back to the Legislative and Rules Committee because Mr. Edwards of District 8 had some concerns about leaf disposal during the fall cleanup and whether leaves were properly defined as litter. The matter again came up for RTM consideration at a later meeting, at which time commercial haulers addressed the full RTM to express their concerns about the amount of the fines in the proposed ordinance and the lack of an appeal process. As a result, the matter was again referred back to the Legislative and Rules Committee. Before our committee took up the matter, we were informed by Attorney McLaughlin of the Law Department that the Select Board would be speaking with the commercial haulers and that a revised ordinance would be forthcoming from the Board of Selectmen for L&R consideration. At our meeting on September 13, Attorney McLaughlin told us that he had met with the commercial haulers at the transfer station, and the ordinance that appears on our call represents the compromise worked out between the haulers and the Board of Selectmen. The ordinance that's now before you has no differentiation between the fines levied against homeowners and commercial haulers. The initial fine for unlawful dumping is the same now as it was in the 1940s version of the ordinance. The schedule of fines thereafter is far less than what was proposed in the September 2009 version of the ordinance, and the ordinance now also provides the opportunity for the commercial haulers to wipe their slate clean, so subsequent fines would again start at $100. Finally, there is an appeal mechanism in place whereby the Board of Selectmen will designate a hearing officer to hear the appeal. We took 2 votes on this item. As the legal order, it was 11-0-0 with District 10 absent. We also took a vote on the merits. The majority of our committee members were frustrated that the Board of Selectmen had conceded too much in its effort to appease the commercial haulers. This ordinance had been brought to us last year with the intent of providing some deterrent by way of significant fines so that the commercial haulers would feel some obligation to ensure that they weren't dumping dangerous waste at our transfer station. excuse me, after proposing some reasonable fines and treating the commercial haulers differently than the homeowners who bring their weekly garbage to the dump, the Board of Selectmen has now returned the initial fine for dumping hazardous waste back to the levels of the 1940s. Furthermore, it provides for an opportunity to wipe the slate clean for the commercial haulers and to provide for an appeal system which will cost the town time and money to collect minimal fines. Our committee considered raising the fines, but that would have meant raising the fines against the residents because this version of the ordinance does not differentiate between residents and commercial haulers. Our vote on the merits was 2 in favor, 9 opposed, with District 10 absent. The only votes in favor of this ordinance were from Districts 6 and 8. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Kavee, Vice Chair of our Public Works Committee.
We considered this item Monday night, and I'll give the vote first. It was 9 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention. There is some concern that the item refers to private property as well as property that interfaces between the town and the haulers, for example. The Public Works Department, or its zoning enforcement branch, has been very low-keyed on enforcing conflicts between private property and private property. Leaves blown from one private property to another. Disputes between neighbors. They seem to stay away from them. Even littering with antique cars or wrecked cars. They're very low-keyed on enforcement. That's a weakness. The words are there. The rules are there. Thou shalt not litter on your own property or your abandoned own property. But it's the main thrust of Public Works enforcement is between haulers and the nature of rubbish being disposed of, not disputes between neighbor and neighbor. So it is a weakness, and I would think at least the leaf issue was probably the reason for the no vote. But at any rate, the wording was not questioned, and our vote was 9 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention, with District 1 absent. District 3 was the opposed, and District 8 was the abstention.
Thank you. Discussion on item 4. Mr. Von Keyserling, District 8, be followed by Mr. Butel.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator. This is an item which I've worked on personally for a long time. If you recall the history of this, it was before us last year or last spring, and the big concern there, we had a delegation from the refuse haulers here who raised issue about the balance and fairness of the process of indicating a violation and the fine involved with the violation. And they felt that there were some unworkable clauses in it. We sent it back to have those things remedied. Over the summer, there was a lot of time spent between the haulers, Mr. McLaughlin of our law department, myself, members of the DPW Holly Hill staff, and the Seifert's organization to work out and mediate this. What you see before you is basically the result of this discussion and coming to an agreement. The trash haulers were never opposed to this action on the part of the town. They just wanted to have it applied in a workable way, and that has been arranged. And I want to commend again Mr. McLaughlin for a lot of good legal work, because we brought reason out of, light out of heat. The main objection apparently to this, that you're accepting this ordinance, is that somebody feels it's a two-tiered, they want a two-tiered fine. They want somebody who violates the code, which is basically a misdemeanor with a fine, like a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. They want 2 different classes of violators. If I'm a businessman, my parking ticket is $50. If I'm a housewife, it's only $25. It's basically what they're saying. And I object to this as a matter of law. The law should be even-handed. It's the violation that's fined. It's not the violator. We don't discriminate on that basis, and that's in fact what's being asked for. If the concern is that this law may be applied too widely, and that the fine of $1,000, et cetera, could be applied for somebody throwing a cup out a window as a littering thing, I refer you to the part of the ordinance that says for that kind of it, there's a $250 fine for all the other infractions in the litter ordinance. This only applies to people bringing things to the town dump recycling center and dumping them in the main garbage house. Now, if a resident comes down and dumps a toilet bowl, let's say, which is illegal or improper under this, in the main house, there are a couple of things will happen. First of all, there's a man there who examines everything that's getting dumped and will say to them, just as he will with the commercial haulers, that's not supposed to go here, that's in violation, would you please take that and put it in the construction waste, for example, which the man will do, and there's no infraction, no violation, so we're confused. However, and that's same, by the way, is with the trash hauler. If he finds in a load of 60 yards, which is the size of what would fill over the stage, of it comes out of those big garbage trucks, a cubic yard or something of waste that's improper, the man there who's inspecting it will say, this is improper, correct it, he put too much cardboard in there, recyclables, remedy it. If he remedies it, no problem. The fines only come into place, I think, on the third shot, basically, they graduate, and at the third shot is where people get the heavy fines, as they should. And whether you're a homeowner or a garbage man, you should get whacked with a good fine. And I think if a homeowner was consistently doing this 3 times in a row, I'd hit him with a toilet bowl, let alone the fine. But I mean, that's just abuse. So I see that there's no point, there is no harm to the homeowner here. They're not in jeopardy. It's an equality of application of the law. It is a sound law. Again, it has been well worked out. All the parties that are involved in this and affected by it agree directly. There's no problem. I don't see why we have to look for problems or solutions when there is no problem. It is all there if you read the legislation correctly and thoroughly and in context. So there is no damage done. The only inequity would happen is if you were to create a 2-tiered system for parking tickets on Greenwich Avenue, or whether a man speeds or a woman speeds on the thruway. Thank you.
Mr. Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, as the chairman of District 8, I wanted to rise because we had some discussion in the district. I also served as the substitute alternate at Public Works, so was referred to twice and was the individual that abstained on their vote. And the individual who voted no based on the issues that I rose. This is the waste and litter section of Town Code. As you've heard prior speakers say, the driving force initially behind this was the audit committee of the BET dealing with waste hauling to the dump, out-of-town waste, recyclables and waste. That was the driving force. But in the process of opening up this ordinance, which we have not dealt with for in some time, we also addressed the litter section. And in the litter section, besides addressing, we've made a change. We used to treat litter or define litter as that which creates a public safety issue. We have now added the word nuisance. It is my understanding that the word nuisance would be required for a motorist who drops something out of a vehicle that doesn't stay in the roadway. Perhaps it's not considered littering if it doesn't present a safety issue. One of the key points that was raised, and one of my objections when we address the nuisance is, you've heard, the Department of Public Works does not want to be involved in a dispute between one neighbor and another blowing leaves onto one another's property or into a public street. Blowing leaves onto a neighbor's property is a nuisance. As was discussed in our district, reference was made to an individual in Kent, Connecticut who died in a motorcycle accident because leaves and grass clippings had been blown into a public street. So I just want to take this opportunity to rise and let all of our neighbors and their landscaping contractors know that it is against the law and you are subject to a $250 fine if you are blowing your grass clippings, leaf clippings out onto a public street. And I can tell you, having driven around town during leaf season, the town could make a substantial amount of money if it enforced that ordinance. Thank you.
How about plowing snow out into the road? All right, further discussion on item 4. Mr. Cornelius, District 3.
Good evening, everybody. I've been in the refuse business for 30 years, and it's very difficult to keep out of town, not out of town, but people from dumping in your containers over and over again, and to keep your loads very clean. Everybody has been contributing to make this process most acceptable to the town and to the haulers. There's a guy down at the dump now who inspects every load that is dropped off. And if we're going to talk about litter, we should talk about that in the number 10 item tonight with the phone books. That I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. But we've worked hard as haulers and the town to remedy this situation and to get this ordinance forward. And I think it's a good ordinance, and I think it should be passed tonight. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 4. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item number 4. Proceed to poll your delegation. I have the results of the vote on item number 2 regarding the bridge project on Riversville Road over the Byram River. Those in favor, 199. Opposed, 0. Abstaining, 0. That item is carried. Item 8 now comes before us. May we have that resolution? Mr. Wells, on behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee.
This is a resolution requested by the Legislative and Rules Committee to adopt a capital projects review committee. You'd be happy to know that it is as it appears in the call.
Thank you. That being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second and is now presently before us. May we have the committee reports on item number 8. Mr. Wells, and I invite all our committee chairs to come forward. Doug Wells with the Legislative and Rules Report.
This resolution, along with several other special committee resolutions, was postponed indefinitely by the RTM. However, before this resolution was postponed indefinitely, the RTM passed 2 amendments. One was to change the CPRC from a 7-person special committee to one in which each district is represented. The second change made by the RTM was to insert a sunset clause. Those 2 revisions have been incorporated into this draft of the proposal to create this new committee to review capital projects. This matter came before us in May. Our vote at that time was 11-0 with District 1 absent, and we voted to put this item on the June call. However, I missed the filing deadline at that time, so it was then placed on the September call. Because there have been no changes to the resolution since May, our committee chose to let the May vote stand, which was, as I said before, 11-0.
Thank you. Bob Brady with the report of the Education Committee.
Good evening. The Education Committee took this item up last Monday night. All districts were represented. Legislative and Rules Chairman Wells presented this item to a joint meeting of the Land Use, Finance, and Education Committees. It was considered last year and now is being postponed, brought back by Legislative and Rules. It establishes a committee with the responsibility to review and report to the RTM on the town's long-term capital plan, including its consistency with the Plan of Conservation and Development, its financing approach, and other related issues. When referred to Legislative and Rules, 2 amendments had been made to the rule proposed by the special committee. 1 to put in a 2-year sunset provision, and 2 to provide a delegate from each district rather than delegates nominated by the Appointments Committee. The revised rule includes these provisions. We voted 9 in favor, 1 opposed, 2 abstentions to recommend this, adopting this resolution. The no and the abstentions believe that the work described should be done by the Budget Overview Committee and existing committees. Thank you.
Thank you. William Drake, Chair of our Budget Overview Committee.
Evening. The Budget Overview Committee considered this item at our regular meeting on September 9th. We reviewed the intended tasks, some related to overview of the capital budget, which is one of the tasks assigned to our committee in Appendix B to the RTM rules, which summarizes the functions of the committees. Some tasks, A and B, among the list of tasks, relate to the functions of the Finance Committee. Some, item C, is possibly within a given building committee's responsibilities. Some, item H, relate to the POCD, which is within the expertise of the Land Use Committee. And there are tasks which touch upon the functions of the BET and the Selectman's Office and the Capital Improvements Project Committee. We noted the responsibility of our committee in Appendix B to the rules, which says, among other things, monitors implementation of important elements in the current year's budget, including capital improvements. And Appendix B provides that these summaries of the RTM Standing Committee's functions provide an outline, but are not intended to limit or restrict in any manner the activities of these committees. So our committee's view is that a certain number of these functions of the new committee are within our duties, and since the defined functions aren't intended to restrict our committee's work, we expect to continue. Our committee voted 8 against this resolution with 4 absent and none in favor. The reasons given were that the part of this work which is ours is underway. We have a working subgroup on capital. And our members thought the new committee would be duplicative. For our committee, though, we intend to take the motivation behind this to heart in a productive way. We recognize the RTM's desire to be informed and to have opportunities to act on financial overview of the capital budget. So 2 ideas. We're a volunteer body. Our work, everyone's work, is accomplished by individuals volunteering their skills and their energy, and there's a lot of that here. If there are 12 of us among us with the commitment and interest to deepen the budgetary overview of capital, we'd invite you to join our committee. We'd love to have you, and you'd have allies, and you'd have support. And the output of the committee, according to what's in front of you from the resolution, is, quote, a report to the RTM at its April meeting on the findings of the committee with recommendations for action. I think that's a good idea, and I will submit that task to our committee with my recommendation that we undertake it. Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon Ennis with the report of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. We met last Monday to discuss this. The vote was 0-11-1. District 1 abstained because, as the delegate put it, this is the first term on the RTM, and they didn't believe they had the requisite experience to change the RTM rules. Several members of the committee observed that the RTM currently has a representative on the CIP committee. And they further observed that the RTM doesn't get regular reports from this representative. The majority of members on the Finance Committee suggest that the capital review process that's currently in place should be fully utilized before we impose another layer of authority or inspection. And in fact, if we were to do that, it would start to blur the lines of responsibility between the existing functions that currently review capital expenditures. Therefore, the Finance Committee does not support this item and recommends a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Berg with the Land Use Committee report.
The Land Use Committee took this up last Monday night. Our vote was 8-4-0. District 3 voted no because it does not have enough members to cover all committees. District 5 voted no in support of District 3 and because the job of the proposed committee can be folded into the Budget Overview Committee. District 7 and 11 agreed with District 5.
Thank you. You did give the final vote. I didn't write it down, but
The vote was 8-4-0.
8-4-0 in favor. Karen Sadekhan with our Parks and Recreation report.
Last Tuesday, Doug Wells, Chairman of Legislative and Rules, joined our committee and pointed out that this is a regular committee versus a special committee, the new one. The committee has a 2-year sunset clause. The committee is just another way to disseminate more information about the CIP, which is a good thing. And the CPRC would meet with the appropriate committees along the way of doing its work, including the BET and the First Selectman, etc. Several points were made by our committee members. The main concern was the timeliness and redundancy possibilities with other RTM committees. Would a report from this new committee be too late to impact the budget? Was one question. One suggestion was that they could spend time looking closely at bonding issues. In all, the committee supported the resolution. The vote was 10-1-0. District 1 was absent. District 9 voted no because they felt the committee was not necessary.
Thank you. Karen Foss-Leotis with the Health and Human Services report.
The committee considered the proposed RTM rules change, which is number 8 on the September call. Doug Wells was not present during the discussion, but did come toward the end of our meeting to answer any questions from the committee. It was noted that this was an amended version of the rules change originally proposed by the moderator's special committee earlier in this year. The current proposed version has representatives from each district on the proposed CIP committee. The prior version had less than full representation from each district. Discussion first focused on whether it was necessary to have this committee since the Budget Overview Committee is charged with looking at the town's capital expenditures. One committee member felt that the proposed CIP committee was a good idea as this individual had sat on the BOC in prior years, and during his tenure on the committee, the BOC never looked at specific capital projects in the CIP. He did note that in the past, the BOC's review of the budget was dependent on what the chairperson decided to do, and he was not sure as to what the current chairperson's view on review of capital expenditures is. Hopefully, after his report, he now knows. Other committee members voiced support of the rules change, stating that there was a number of major capital expenditures that have been placed in the queue, such as the Central Fire Station, the Greenwich High School Auditorium, the Nathaniel Witherell renovations, stormwater drainage and runoff, and other infrastructure projects. The feeling by these individuals is that given the past history of the RTM's review, or lack of review, of these projects, as well as there being no current mechanisms to do a full-fledged review of capital projects, it would be worthwhile to have one committee charged with reviewing the projects to see whether they had merit and whether they should be pursued by the town. They also noted that since the rule change had a sunset date of 2 years, it would be worthwhile to try it out to see whether it should become a permanent committee of the RTM. Some members voiced the opinion that some districts were stretched extremely thin, and despite having full membership in their districts, they did not have enough members to cover existing committees, let alone adding another committee for them to have more staff. Also, the BOC is charged with reviewing town capital expenditures, and just because it has not been done in the past should not mean that they should not do it now and in the future. It was questioned as to whether or not the BOC should be looked at to determine as to how they might better structure themselves to look at capital expenditures. The committee vote on the legislative and proposed rule change was 4-6-2. The dissenting votes felt that the RTM did not need another committee to review the capital projects. District 8 representatives abstained and wanted information as to whether the BET felt this committee would be value added to the budget review process. District 7 representative abstained, feeling that additional information as to the workings of the BOC on reviewing capital projects was needed.
Thank you. Mr. Kavee with the Public Works Committee report.
The Public Works Committee voted none in favor, 11 opposed, no abstentions, with District 1 absent. The issue was the redundancy issue, and in particular because the Public Works Department has a great number of discretionary capital projects which are reviewed by the Public Works Committee. There's even more redundancy that affects the Public Works Department.
Thank you. Dr. Delman with the Town Services report.
Good evening. Town Services met last Tuesday night. It was felt that it's just another committee that would be reviewing what's already being looked at, and fewer members will be asked to attend more meetings. We voted 1 in favor, 10 opposed, no abstentions. District 2 is absent.
Thank you. Mr. DeMarco with the Transportation Committee report.
Transportation Committee actually voted 5-7-0. And some of the reasons were the same as you've heard. Duplication of committees are doing the same thing. Formation of another committee may only result in some of the structural problems that we see in some committees. Would add confusion and perhaps another burden on smaller districts, and town department heads would have to attend an additional meeting. Those are the no votes. Yes votes, the reasons were that some people felt that the BOC would do a better job of its own push the BOC to do a better job of its own responsibilities, provided greater focus on, more oversight on the capital budget, which is clearly critical with big ticket items facing the town. Following those explanations of the reasons for the voting, two dissenting members felt that they would change their votes, so it would then become 7-5.
Thank you. Is there a report from our Appointments Committee? Okay. Discussion on item 8. Dr. Carlson? Mr. Von Keisling, do you want to give a report?
Certainly.
Since the train has arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, Appointments Committee met on this. Unfortunately, at the meeting, 2 of our members were at a joint meeting on the other matter with Finance and Education that held late. The vote was 10 in favor, 0-0 in favor of the creation of this committee. If I were there, I would have voted against it, but I wasn't.
Okay. Discussion on item 8. Mr. Brady, be followed by Joan Caldwell.
Good evening once again. In October 2006 and December 2007, the RTM adopted sense of the meeting resolutions calling for the linking of the town's capital plan to its plan of conservation and development. The POCD is, in the end, the RTM's plan. We adopt it, and it only becomes effective when we adopt it. At $28 million, the town's fiscal 2011 capital budget is second only in size to the education budget. The 15-year capital plan calls for $435 million of general fund spending. Presently, the RTM gives only a cursory look at the out years of the capital plan, especially to the quality of the numbers and the escalations and contingencies included in them. Yet these out-year numbers substantially influence decision-making regarding the current year's budget, and especially its financing. The Finance Committee does consider the current year capital budget financing, but not the structure of the entire financing of the entire plan over its 15-year period. To the extent that out years are reviewed, the capital plan is looked at primarily from the perspectives of the functional committees reviewing it, not in the overall. Not how it implements the plan of conservation and development, and not how it is financed. For example, the current capital budget has little to say about how the town plans to deal with its stormwater problems. Yet we all know that there's a very large number out there somewhere in some time period. The Capital Projects Review Committee is conceived to redress these oversights. Broadly, it is to review, not create, the First Selectman's capital plan, as amended by the BET, and recommend actions which the RTM should take when the budget is presented to us. It is to specifically address whether the POCD's recommendations are being implemented and to ascertain if there are any non-POCD projects in the capital budget. It is of and reports to the RTM. Its recommendations may be for RTM actions, such as to reduce the amount of money for Project X in the current year budget. And it may offer a sense of the meeting resolutions calling upon the First Selectman or the BET to change priorities as they express them in the capital budget. The new committee's charge is broad. Its task is to analyze, report, and recommend. Its purpose is to allow us to take more informed decisions on the budget that is before us. I urge you to adopt the proposed rule. Thank you.
Joan Caldwell to be followed by Dr. Carlson.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting.
For the benefit of any member here this evening who is serving in his first term, I would like to say that the resolution before you to create a special capital review committee comes from a special study committee created to look at the rules and regulations of the town meeting. It served in the last term. The recommendations that it brought forward have been put on hold and are gradually coming forward into this session via the legislative and rules path. When the special committee first started to meet, we went to the members of the RTM and we said, look, we want input from you. Tell us what you think we need to do, what needs to be done in town meeting, where are there shortages, where are we doing things right. One recommendation, one request came loud and clear from many, many members of the RTM, and that was we need someone or an organization or a group to look at the capital list. At that point, the capital list was just beginning to grow. As was just reported, last term it was $28 million. Next May, I think it's going to grow substantially by what I saw. We recognized the need, and so we met with past chairmen of the Finance Committee and discussed it with them. We were told that the Finance Committee really has its hands full dealing with the current year's budget and maybe a projection of the following year, that they didn't get into capital projects very much. We then talked with members of the BOC, the past chairman who is no longer a member of town meeting, and with a member who is still there. And we got the feeling that they would like to do it, but they were not sure what they were going to do. And in looking at the composition of the committee, we weren't entirely certain that they had the expertise that was needed. They had good people, conscientious people, willing people, but as we viewed this committee or thought about it, we felt it should be composed of people who knew financing, knew bonding, knew what interest trends were and would probably be in the future. And so it seemed to us as though a special committee was the only way out. In view of the fact that the expertise on such a committee is not always easy to find, we went the special committee route, which was less than one representative for each district. Now that has since been discarded or overthrown by a general consensus of the people in this room. Whether you go special committee and give the job to the BOC, or whether you rethink it and create a special committee, the fact still remains that we have on our plate right now 4 or 5 large ticket items. They've already been enumerated. There's the central firehouse, which could be 20 million or it could be 24 million, depending on the route we go. There's the high school auditorium, which was initially talked about as 23 million. It's now printed at 28, and tonight I see 31. Nathaniel Witherell, that has no price tag on it as far as I know. Flood and erosion control, which is placed at somewhere around 110 million. That's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money that the taxpayers are going to have to come forward with. And somebody needs to be tracking these projects, needs to keep us informed on almost an every 3 or 4 month basis as to where we're going and what we can expect, because May is too late. So I urge you to think very seriously how you vote on this. I happen to be of the opinion, and this is now my personal opinion, even though I chair the committee, that the old rule, KISS, is better. Keep it simple, stupid. And we wrote a very detailed description of what this Capital Review Committee should do. I think we would have been better off if we had written 1 or 2 very broad directives and let the committee work its way through. If it were to be done again, that would be my recommendation. Let them work their way through. They'll find out how to do what is necessary, and they will do it in a timely fashion. It's exactly what we did with the Labor Contracts Committee, and it has worked for this town and for this body. I believe a capital committee could do the same thing.
Further discussion on item 8. Dr. Carlson? Mr. Von Keyserling, please state your point of information.
My question was for you, whether the lady who just spoke was in fact suggesting that this be referred back to committee to be worked in accordance with her thinking.
No, she didn't say that, but she did say she would recommend something differently. So I think that's a valid question. Are you recommending some alternate treatment of disposition of this item tonight? Ms. Caldwell.
Mr. Moderator, I would be delighted to recommend an alternative action if I could think of one. The special committee, of course, is long gone. I don't know who else would be willing to take up ownership of this. I have to think that the only one around might be BOC.
All right,
I don't know if
I
they'd
can
step
say
up
this.
to-
I know Mr. Savitz of District 11 intends to offer a motion to refer this to the BOC. So I did recognize Dr. Carlson, and then Mr. Savitz went on to, where's Mr. Savitz? Over there. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. The RTM is here to check the Board of Estimate and Taxation and the Board of Selectmen. My point of view is that in the past decade, we have not done very well in that direction. I would point out the construction of the structure that I call sometimes the police palace as an example of where we have made a mistake. I think there are perhaps other mistakes that will become clearer as time goes on. I would ask you to look at recent history about what has happened about 2 years ago with the fall of Lehman Brothers and the financial turmoil. We may be at the point of what I would call a paradigm change. The last half of the 20th century was a very rich place for America. Over the next few years, we may have a different situation developing that will last for some time. In view of these problems, and perhaps also some of the pension problems that this town, other municipalities in the state has, is that we should be a lot more critical of our spending. An instrument that would allow a forum for criticism of spending is something that is good to have in these special times. I maintain to you that we are in at least a somewhat different time, period of time historically in our country than we were in the period 1950 to 2008. What will be coming in the next decade could be very difficult. Some of these projects need the criticism, perhaps, to put them off longer, perhaps the courage to say, let's not do this. But if we have an instrument that allows people to come in and testify in public, that comes to the RTM with a report, we have a little bit more. I urge you to vote for this. Thank you.
Adam Savitz, District 11.
Mr. Moderator, fellow RTM members, I, like many RTM members, would like more regular and formal review of the capital plan. But like many of us, we're concerned about forming another committee to do so. I know that the Budget Overview Committee has been taken on this responsibility, but I think there should be a more formal process that it takes on this responsibility in terms of its responsibilities in the Appendix B. So I therefore propose that we refer item 8 to the Budget Overview Committee in order that the BOC bring back to the RTM proposed changes to the description of its operational responsibilities as set forth in Appendix B, Section B of the RTM rules in order to charge the BOC with the responsibility of reviewing capital expenditures of the town.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded to refer item 8 to our Budget Overview Committee with instructions to bring back to the RTM revisions to the jurisdictional summary given to the BOC that is found in Appendix B to the RTM rules, Section B. Discussion on that motion to refer. David Detchen, District 10, to be followed by Mr. Wells, District 2.
When I reviewed the material on this proposed capital committee, a couple of things struck me. First of all, it wasn't altogether clear to me what exactly the committee was supposed to do. In other words, as far as I can tell, there won't be any particular proposals or motions or actions by the RTM that would be submitted to it. Rather, its goal would be to oversee the capital process, the capital vetting process within the town. That throws out, to my mind, a couple of things. First of all, you need to be sure that any such committee has continuity. It's an issue that many of you have heard from me in regard to the Labor Contracts Committee, where labor negotiations are ongoing processes, and that's the same thing with our capital program. You need to have this be a focus, an ongoing focus, a continuing focus that goes from one term to the next, and I certainly think that in the context of any kind of a capital review committee, that should be an important point. Secondly, it ought to see its task, to my mind, as regularly reporting to the RTM, not just in April, but on an ongoing basis as the capital vetting process evolves during the course of the year and in the course of the capital budget being refined and developed by the BET. And third, precisely because this committee, this RTM cannot legislate, we can't simply have a vote here and decree that something will not be built or that monies will not be expended. We can only do that in the context, frankly, of approving or rejecting something that is placed before us by another organ of town government. For that reason, it seems to me important that part of the charge of any kind of a capital committee be, in fact, ongoing relations and ongoing communication with the BET, with the selectmen, and frankly with any other responsible organization. Now, frankly, to my mind, precisely because this is an ongoing process, precisely because it requires continuity and a continued focus, to my mind, having a capital committee, capital review committee, is not a bad idea. I question whether having the BOC take it over, it would need to become the principal part of the BOC's charge, I think, in order to do it justice, and maybe that's what the BOC has in mind. But quite frankly, I wouldn't be opposed to having such a capital review committee as proposed this evening, but I think it needs to be refined, and possibly a 2-year period with a sunset is the way to see if it can be tweaked and worked out.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, and I remind our speakers we are speaking on the motion to refer, which does not allow debate to go into the merits of the item. Do we send this to BOC or not?
Yeah. I would urge you to not send this to BOC. I did a quick straw poll of the committees that reported, and of the committees that reported, it was 57 to 59. 57 in favor of formation of this committee, 59 opposed, and if you take Mr. DeMarco at his word, that would be flip-flop, because he said if they had another opportunity to vote, it would have been 7-5. So we have a very close issue here about whether or not you want this committee. Don't send it to the BOC. Essentially, by sending it to the BOC, that just incorporates this into their charge. And the reality is the BOC has a lot on its plate already, in my mind. They have to look at the current budget. That's a lot of work for them to do. For them to take this on, they're going to be leaving stuff undone on the current budget, or they're going to be leaving stuff undone on the capital projects. They're one committee. That's why the special committee thought it was appropriate to have somebody just looking at the capital improvements list and to be able to report back to the RTM. So I urge you to turn this down and then just vote it up or down. I see that this is a little bit, with the sunset clause, is a little bit like trying to convince your 5-year-old to eat beets. He may not want to do it, but you know what? If he tries it a couple times and doesn't like it, then he won't have to eat them anymore, because we've got that built in as the sunset clause. So give it a chance. In 2 years, it'll be gone if it doesn't work out.
Okay. Dr. Carlson, District 1, speaking on the motion to refer item 8 to our Budget Overview Committee.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, in my opinion, the Budget Overview Committee in recent years has been none too successful. Perhaps the reasons given by the previous speaker are quite to the point, that they have too much on their plate. This will help them out by getting some of it off their plate, and maybe they'll be more efficient and bring us some good cuts. So I recommend to you to turn this down, let this thing be voted in, and let us have such a committee.
Further discussion on the motion to refer? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow members, my name is Steve Warzoa, member of District 9. I also serve as the Vice Chair of the Budget Overview Committee. In speaking with our chairman, Bill Drake, after hearing District 11's motion to refer back to the BOC, we are both in favor of that. We believe that the BOC can work to continue to refine our mission and continue to implement CIP issues and continue to inform the RTM as we do on a periodic basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Irv Porter, District 6, speaking on the motion to refer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I rise to suggest that you do not refer this to the BOC. I rise as a member of the Finance Committee and make this observation. I think all of us understand that many of the major capital projects that are going forward are things that we don't know quite as much about as we would like to know. There is a lack of continuity when it comes to reporting. Irrespective of the current structure and the fact that there is representation to the Finance Committee from an ad hoc member of the CIP committee. But nonetheless, the Finance Committee has, over the summer, tried to understand better what some of the underlying reasons are for the current pay-as-you-go or modified pay-as-you-go structure. So we've looked at some of the options, not with any objective of trying to change things, but strictly to better understand it. And we've all been exposed to an uncomfortable feeling as we sit here when we have to vote an item up or down. Now, having said that, we've all got an obligation in this regard. And simply referring this to back to the Budget Overview Committee, in my judgment, does not dissuade any of us from, or persuade any of us from working harder and trying to have a better understanding of these issues. But whether it's appropriate for that just to be focused through the BOC or it's all of our responsibility is the issue that I stand before you and suggest that it shouldn't be referred, because we've all got an obligation to understand it.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to refer? All right. It being a procedural matter, I will in the first instance see if we can determine this on a voice vote. If you are in favor of sending item 8 to our Budget Overview Committee for the purpose of bringing back to us a revision to the responsibilities of the BOC, you should vote yes. If you are opposed to doing that and want to continue considering item 8 tonight, you should vote no. All those in favor of Mr. Savitt's motion to refer item 8 to the BOC, please signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? No. All right. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Savitt's motion to refer item 8 to the BOC. And please expedite that, as again we will need to await the tabulation of that vote before proceeding further. I do have the results of the vote on item number 4, which was the waste and litter ordinance. Those in favor 172, opposed 28, abstaining 1. That item has carried. And a review of our voting cards shows that districts 5 and 9 had perfect attendance tonight. So congratulations. Keep up the good work. We're over 200 for this meeting as well. Excellent. All right, so we will await the result of the vote on the motion to refer. Mr. Boutel? I have the result of the vote on the motion to refer item 8 to the Budget Overview Committee. Those in favor, 85, opposed, 114, abstaining 2. That motion has failed. Continuing with discussion on item 8. Mary Ferry, District 5.
Good evening. I realize that there's a problem with the sunset clause in this because it says the committee will expire in 2 years. This is now September 2010. Effectively, it won't be running before, if we pass it, won't be running before December 2010. So I would like to change the sunset clause.
Ms. Ferry, let me
Yeah.
just make one correction to the vote. It was 85 in favor, 115 opposed, 2 abstaining. So that motion failed. I'm sorry.
I suggest that the sunset clause read, the CPRC shall automatically terminate in December 2012 unless a majority of the RTM members present at a meeting prior to the sunset date vote to extend the term of the CPRC. So you would in effect delete 2 years from the date RTM approves the creation of the CPRC, the sunset date.
The date you gave was December what?
2012.
Is there a December 31?
Sure.
All right. Now, let me just ask this. We are in the beginning of we are in the first year of a 2-year RTM term.
True.
Do we want to give this committee a full term to operate? Which, you know, if we were to pass this and we were to put our representatives on it, in the current term, that group would only be working together essentially for 1 year, 2011. Then we would start a new term, and we'd put another group, which, you know, hopefully we have continuity, but not necessarily. And your 2012 date would only give that new group one year. Do we?
If you don't start.
So I'm just asking. You know, it's your proposal, but
Well,
what's your pleasure?
I am willing to go to 2013. I do think we should start it promptly. If the body wants to go 3 years instead of 2, fine.
Okay. So
December.
Is there? All right. So Ms. Ferry is moving to amend item 8 to change the sunset clause so that the new committee would terminate on December 31, 2013.
Unless
Right?
the majority.
Correct. And the rest of it So then we'll take out, after the word terminate, 2 years through approves the creation of the CPRC,
Well,
right? And then we would leave the sunset date unless, et cetera, remains in there.
okay, that's fine.
Is that correct?
So moved.
All right. Is there any objection to that proposed change? Mr. Von Keyserling?
I object to it, but I have a question on that information for you or the town attorney. If we were to do this, we would in effect affect another section of the RTM which is distinct and different, and they would not have the chance of their own decision. The way it's presently worded, this would be contained within this session, which rules its own business. The next session, we all know, is a separate, different people elected by our body.
Mr. Von Keyserling is making a point that we would somehow be affecting another session of the RTM. As it currently is written, this committee would go into another session of the RTM. So there is no change. I mean, that issue is not a real one. There would be no difference between this term affecting a subsequent term. In both provisions for sunset date, that would be the case. All right, but you do object to, so let me ask this. We have had a motion to amend item 8 as described. Is there a second? Second. All right, is there an objection to that amendment? Mr. Von Keyserling, do you object to that? I'm just wondering, do we need to vote on the motion to amend? We can adopt by unanimous consent, or we'll have discussion on the motion and we'll have a recorded vote. Right now, the proposed motion to amend is to change the sunset date provision so that this committee, if we pass item 8 with this amended sunset date, the committee would terminate on December 31, 2013. The current RTM term will end on December 31, 2011. 11. We are in the first calendar year of a 2-year term. So there will be elections in November of 2011, and the elected members will begin their term on January 1, 2012. Right now, if we left it as a 2-year sunset, that would sunset in the next RTM term in September of that first calendar year of the new term. The proposal is to allow this committee to work not only through the end of this current term, which expires on December 2011, but for an additional full 2-year term. All right, there is an objection, so let's have discussion on the motion to amend. Is there anyone who cares? Lucy Krasner, District 5. Can everybody hear? Ms. Krasner, please come forward. And if there are any other interested speakers, I invite you to come forward so we don't delay in waiting to hear your pearls of wisdom.
I think this is an excellent suggestion to give this, if we vote to have this new committee, which I would actually want to address when we have that chance. This is just addressing the the sunset clause. It's an excellent idea to make it fully for the 13, into 2013. Let's give it a chance if we're going to do it at all. And we would start it right away, but then you have new members coming on for 2 years, so you can select from your districts people who would be suitable for this committee. So 2013 sounds excellent.
Thank you. John Harkins, oh no, okay. Further discussion on the motion to amend. This is a matter of substance. We are prohibited from taking a voice vote. It must be recorded. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Ferry, motion to amend item 8 regarding sunset date, and please proceed to poll your delegation. Yes. Yes, let us continue discussion of the merits of this, and anyone who would like to comment after we have the result of this pending vote, I will permit that. Lucy Krasner, speaking on the merits of a new Capital Projects Review Committee?
I was on the moderator's special committee that discussed this as a very valuable new committee. And we felt at the time that the Budget Overview Committee really discussed the current budget as it was being put before us, and that we really needed people to discuss the long-term effects of financing and the cost to the community of very expensive capital projects. I think this is just a crucial thing to do. I was more in favor of it when we had a limited number of people, but which has the way it was originally presented. But I certainly think it's well worth doing with the change, which is one person from every district and an alternate as a regular standing committee. I think the town will benefit tremendously by this more in-depth review.
Thank you. Further discussion on the merits of item 8. Now, please understand what you are currently voting on is just the motion to amend the sunset date provision. Further discussion on the merits. Mr. Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, the previous speaker just ended her remarks with a prescient point. And alternates. There is no provision for alternates. My concern is earlier speakers who served on the special committee talked about wanting the best and the brightest, and that's why they were recommending a special committee of less than 12 members. As a district chairman who would have to run an election from 8, we had the benefit of having a large district. But as I look, no offense to the rest of District 8, the best and the brightest, I have a number of committee chairmen. Gordon Ennis chairing Finance, Rick Kroll chairing Public Works. I'm not going to ask them to give up chairmanships to move on to this committee. So I'm a little concerned about how we staff up this committee in the first term. If we really want to get it off to a good start, I think we're probably better off waiting until we get to an election, modifying the rules of the town meeting, and really taking a look at where the areas of responsibility fall. You did vote down a proposal before to give these responsibilities to the BOC, but I've served on the RTM long enough to remember, and I served on the BOC when it was chaired by Russ Childs. I have been here long enough to remember when the BOC was the Cost Containment Committee, not the BOC. The BOC used to set its own agenda of focusing on certain long-range targets. They were looking at fixed charges, healthcare costs, the rest, before we started looking at them on labor contracts. BOC is adaptable. I would suggest that perhaps, I'm not in favor of voting this down tonight. I certainly don't want to stand here and make a motion to postpone indefinitely. I want the debate to take place. Somebody else pointed out before, having counted the math, we are somewhat equally divided. But I'm not so sure, even if it's a good committee and a good idea, that we will be able to staff it up with our best and brightest without stripping other committees or creating disruptions in districts. As I said, in 8, we had the benefit of 24, 25 plus members. In some other districts, like Bob Tuthill's district, you know, they're going to have somebody who's going to have 3 committee responsibilities now.
It's now Tom Cornelius's district.
So I am sorry, Tom's district. And Tom, I just moved. I need a new waste hauler, so I will see you after the meeting. Now that the ordinance has passed. But there are smaller districts that are really going to suffer. And as I said, well, this may be a good idea. I'm not sure the timing is right, and therefore I'm not sure I can support this evening.
Further discussion on the merits. Mr. Kozlowski, District 8.
Good evening. One of my interests here on the subject of the information we receive from the BOC and capital projects overviews in general is we're always looking forward at projects that are current and ahead of us. One of the things I'm not getting information on, I don't have a good, clear picture on to make future decisions with our monies, is to know what carryovers we have on past capital projects. Perhaps this committee could be a committee that simply keeps us abreast of what we're carrying over. We've had huge cost overruns on Glenville School renovations, Hamilton Avenue School renovations, the police department facility, and perhaps if we had a clear picture of how many cost overruns we had coming from the past that we're carrying, we'd have a clearer picture on what money we don't have to spend at this point, and perhaps a committee that can take a look at that and give us capital past performances, cost overruns that we're carrying, could give us information to make us better decision makers for future capital projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on item 8? All right, let's just, I'm sorry, Christine Edwards, District 8.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, colleagues. I'm secretary for the BOC and have been for the last 8 years. We have, with increasingly great focus, looked and divided our group up into people who look at every single budget and project. We have huge analysis going on. We have people attending the Board of Education meetings, the various other meetings that are going on. Mr. Carlson, Dr. Carlson, I invite you to take a look at some of our stuff and to please read the minutes for the BOC to see what depth and detail we're doing on this. I see this as a completely redundant committee. To extend this makes no sense to me. I urge you all to vote this down. And to have a committee that we have as the BOC, and we have a capital project as well committee, this is another layer of bureaucracy at a time when we should be looking to pare things down. We are so fortunate in the town of Greenwich to have so many people who have very, very fine financial skills, who look at these budgets for our districts, for the committees on which they serve, for finance. I can't imagine a more talented group here at the RTM. For those people who feel we need more detail, then come to more of the meetings that look at these budgets. Come to the year when we go through, I think it's May, when we go through all of the BET budgets. Every single detail is discussed at those meetings, those budget meetings for BET. You want to see what's going on in Public Works and all the projects, come and take a look at that. And then do the work. That's what we're here to do as the body. But I think we have so much talent already within our districts, within our existing committees, within the BOC, and within Capital. We do not need one more layer of bureaucracy. This is what we should be ending, layer upon layer of bureaucracy. Let's pare down and just do the work. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 8? Betsy Fruman, Chair of District 9.
I'm wondering if creating this committee isn't solving a problem that existed 3-4 years ago that the current Budget Overview Committee has already worked on and is solving. I just want you to think about that.
All right, I have the result of the vote on the amendment of the sunset provision of item 8. Those in favor, 158, opposed 35, abstaining 4. So what is currently before us is a proposed rule change that has a sunset date of December 31, 2013. Further discussion on item 8. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 8, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 10 now comes before us. Mr. Delman, is Dr. Delman here?
Mr. Moderator, on behalf of 20 registered voters, the motion is as it appears in the call.
All right, will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 10 has been moved and seconded. May we have the committee reports on this, beginning with our Legislative and Rules Committee and its chairman, Doug Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Our committee took this item up last Monday night. Evan Delman appeared at our meeting to speak in favor of this resolution to provide a mechanism whereby commercial distributors of paper products, defined as in Mr. Delman's proposed amendment, would be defined as bulky waste in excess of 50 pages, can be compelled to be removed, make them remove their paper products after placing it on private property, and by creation of a mechanism whereby a resident can opt out of the opportunity to receive phone books and other bulky paper waste. Our committee was concerned with the difficulty in revising an ordinance that would be coming up for consideration this evening. Mr. Byrne, who was present at our meeting, pointed out that it could create a logistical problem in amending the ordinance and that there were inconsistencies in Mr. Delman's proposed revision and the ordinance as it appears on the call. Others on our committee were concerned that there may be unintended consequences to passage of this resolution without the opportunity for representatives from the phone company or others to weigh in on this matter. Mr. Delman pointed out that he copied this resolution from a similar resolution that has been promulgated in the city of Stamford. Nevertheless, our committee thought that more consideration should be given before we vote on this matter. Mr. Delman was asked if there was a compelling need to resolve this matter at our September meeting, and he confirmed that there was no emergency or other compelling reason. We therefore voted to refer this matter to the Legislative and Rules Committee for further consideration, and after item 4 on the call is resolved. Our vote on the motion to refer was 10-1 with District 10 absent. District 4 was opposed.
Thank you. Greg Fruman with the report of our Town Services Committee.
Town Services met on this item on Tuesday. After discussion, it was brought to our attention that Legislative and Rules was going to refer it back to themselves. As a committee, we felt that was a great idea, and we voted in favor of Legislative and Rules referring it back to themselves, 10-0-1.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Wells.
Mr. Moderator, on behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee, we move that this matter be referred back to our committee for further work.
All right, that being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to refer item 10 to the Legislative and Rules Committee. I will call for a voice vote. If you are in favor of referring this, you should vote yes. All those in favor of the motion to refer item 10 to our Legislative and Rules Committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. That being the last agenda, no. Okay, that is our last agenda item. However, hopefully we are all aware that Mr. Crowell did intend to offer, as Mr. Anderson called it, a SOMR, the sense of the meeting resolution. Mr. Crowell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, fellow members. Mr. Moderator, as I understand it, at this point I am speaking only to the body to encourage them to take up the motion. For which
All
I
right, so
need,
you
not
intend
the merits.
to offer a motion not on our agenda, and in order to do that, you are going to move that we take up this non-agenda item.
That is correct, Mr. Moderator.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that we consider a non-agenda item that is a debatable motion, and under state law, it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. Mr. Crowell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As has clearly been said, I have a monumental task in front of me to convince 2/3 of you this evening. I would hope that you would support my efforts in considering the sensitive meeting resolution. I have distributed a copy to your district chairs for review so that you have a hard copy to review what hopefully will come before us if we elect to take this up. The RTM has spent a considerable amount of time over the last week considering the MISA project. I had originally brought it before this committee as an MI referral, and has since, as you know, withdrawn the MI referral, and will ask you later to consider this sensitive meeting resolution. Many of you have asked me why I withdrew the MI referral. And my simple answer to everybody is because I want to be productive. And that was the real reason for me to bring the referral to the RTM. I've expressed all along that it was a matter of the planning process and getting involved at a stage when I felt as though this body and the community needed an update on the project and should review some of the considerations that were being made by the Board of Ed and the Building Committee. And in order to be effective, I think we want to continue to see this project move through the land use process so that we can come to a completed project and understand what the costs and benefits will be to the community. I believe unnecessarily, the deferral action was considered or created more of a me against them mentality. I don't think that's the case, and I don't think that's productive for the community. I believe the community should be afforded some mechanism to review these projects, especially when they take years at times, in this case, from when we appropriate the architectural and engineer, the A&E money, to a point when we are going to get the project put in front of us in its completed form for funding. Usually at that time, it's during the budget process, and it's very difficult, as we have just discussed through the CIP committee process, to really look at the project in its full merits. And oftentimes, we are faced with a decision of either approve it, cut it, or reduce it. It does not give us a lot of options. It doesn't give us the opportunity to understand what the project has brought forward. I think we had a lot of discussion about that on the previous topic. And I think it's important that the RTM, at some point, come to terms with how we're going to review and get updates on these projects in the coming years if we're going to be effective as a body. I can tell you that, right now, we only have a couple of options afforded to us, and it's not a pleasant process in the sense of referring the MI. It was not taken well by the Board of Education, and I can understand where they felt as though it was more of an aggressive measure and may have caused unnecessary delays. And obviously, that was not the intent. The intent is to make sure that we are getting a project worthy of moving forward at the budget dollars that are being considered. Even at this stage, as we review these, review this project, we don't have a final project in front of us. The project still has a number of land use agencies to go through, final site plan, and then it would return to this body for final funding application. So there still is a process in front of us that can change the shape. But I believe at this stage, at least we're not looking at conceptual drawings, as we were when we approved the A&E money almost 3 years ago. At this phase, the building committee has done an exceptional job in putting together a project that we can now understand what the benefits will be and what, obviously, the other associated costs in a more concrete fashion will be with the project. Many members of this body had spoke to me during the MI review process and as we considered this project during the past week as to, well, we understand that there's some points because we had talked about some of the issues that we would like to see or maybe some improvements to the process, but we don't want to delay the project. We don't want to encumber the project by referring it back to the Board of Ed and they having to go through maybe some undue expenses or undue process in order to continue forward. By taking up the by taking up the sense of the meeting resolution this evening, I think this is a compromise, something that was mentioned in some of the committees in our district to come up with a way for the RTM to somewhat be effective here, show that it's reviewed the project and would like it to move forward through the land use process. Concerns were raised by the Board of Education in the same review that, number one, that even if we refer the MI back to them for consideration, they were given no direction as to what the concerns were of the RTM. I believe this is a valid concern, as the process in the MI referral is either a vote up or down, yes, it goes back, or no, it does not. There's obviously the discussions we have in committee, but we don't have any directives that are specifically put towards the Board of Ed as to what we might want to see as far as improving the project in its planning phase. Because I've been very careful to make sure that we've stayed focused on the planning stages of this project at this point in time. The RTM will consider, obviously, as it comes down the process, the budget process, the funding for the project when it comes to us from what we're told on their current schedule in the next budget cycle. So we will have that opportunity. I believe the sense of the meeting resolution this evening and the opportunity to bring it up will give the Board of Ed those directives that it needs and give us some clarity as to how we move forward. So I ask you this evening to help me and support bringing up the sensitive meeting resolution so that we can be productive, we can be constructive, and the time that we've spent in the last week reviewing this project is used in a beneficial manner. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to take up Mr. Crowell's non-agenda item. Mr. Von Kaiserling, District 8. And I do have the result of the vote on item number 8, which was the proposed capital project review committee. Those in favor, 82, opposed 115. With no abstentions, that item has failed. Mr. Von Kaiserling.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Many of you know, have been a strong supporter of the MISA project from the very beginning, and was concerned when the referral was brought up on the MI. We went through the process. Members of my district, myself, and Mr. Kroll discussed this at great length. I want to commend Mr. Kroll for the graciousness of his withdrawal of the MI request, which could have had severe repercussions, and his substitution of this sense of the meeting resolution. We all worked with him on it. If you read that resolution, there's nothing in there which is really harmful. First of all, it's a sense of the meeting resolution, which only states an opinion. It's not binding. It's simply a direction in that sense of what we feel. If you read what we feel, it says the two resolutions. One, that we support the Board of Ed and MISA Building Committee going ahead with this project, which is basically in concurrence with all of the committee votes that we had in the RTM on this issue. The second thing is that they asked the Board of Ed to consider some certain items that are ancillary or collateral to the MISA project in going forward in the future. In other words, to try to, wherever possible, coordinate future needs with the present project. I believe that this is a positive thing, an affirmative and helpful thing. It will be most useful for me, and I think the rest of us, to get the opinion of Mr. Anderson, perhaps, who's the chairman of the Board of Education on this matter, and whether they have any problems with the sense of the meeting resolution. Thank you.
All right, the issue before us is, do we take this up tonight or not? We're not talking about the merits of this. Betsy Fruman, District 9, speaking on the motion to take up Mr. Crowell's non-agenda item.
Thank you. If there were an emergency, I could see why we would take this up. But there is no emergency, and I would prefer, as a member of the RTM, to be fully educated, to have this go through the Education Committee, to have the Board of Education and the MISA people be able to fully respond to what's being said here. I think it would do a better job in educating all of us if this came before us through either a district, a committee, or 20 voters. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to take this up? Yes, who? Nancy Weissler, District 5.
Fellow members of the RTM, I would ask you not to amend the agenda tonight. I do think that this would not be consistent with our practice in terms of referring items to committees, giving the Board of Ed and other interested parties the opportunity to review this, to have the district committees. And I'd also refer you to the RTM rules about a sense of the meeting. I'm sorry, I'm just blacking out here. Quote, the RTM, this is a procedure for formally expressing a concern or a collective viewpoint on one or more issues of local, state, or national importance. And I, for one, just received this as I walked in tonight, so I certainly haven't had the opportunity to review it. And I don't see how we, without that opportunity, could have a collective viewpoint on it. So I would urge you not to amend the agenda.
Further discussion on the motion to take this matter up? All right, we will need a recorded vote. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Motion to consider non-agenda item. And we obviously will need to await the result of that before proceeding further. We have the result of the vote on the motion to take up Mr. Crowell's non-agenda item. Those in favor, 45, opposed 147, abstaining 3. That item has failed. There being no further business to come before the meeting, and absent objection, this meeting stands adjourned upon unanimous consent. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe trip home.